The first thing the Japanese soldiers noticed wasn't the sound. It was the smell. A thick cloud of burning gasoline rolled across the jungle before the American tanks even appeared. The smoke crawled through shattered trees, over abandoned foxholes, and into underground bunkers where exhausted Imperial Japanese soldiers waited in complete darkness. Then came the roar. Not the deep rumble of ordinary tanks. This was different. Mounted on the front of modified American Sherman tanks was one of the most terrifying weapons of the Second World War. A flamethrower capable of projecting burning fuel more than 100 yards. American Marines had given these machines a nickname. Zippos. Like the famous cigarette lighter, these tanks could ignite almost anything with a single burst. For the Japanese defenders hiding beneath islands like Iwo Jima, Peleliu, Saipan, and Okinawa, the arrival of a Zippo tank often meant something worse than death. It meant fire. Not the brief explosion of artillery. Not the clean impact of a rifle bullet. But an unstoppable river of burning fuel that flowed into caves, bunkers, trenches, and ventilation shafts. Inside those underground fortifications, temperatures became unbearable within seconds. The oxygen disappeared. Smoke filled every chamber. Many soldiers suffocated before the flames even reached them. Others faced a terrible decision. Remain inside and burn alive. Or rush outside into a storm of American machine gun fire. Either way, survival was almost impossible. Yet something even more shocking happened during these battles. Instead of retreating from the flamethrower tanks, many Japanese soldiers deliberately charged straight toward them. Some carried satchel charges. Others clutched bundles of explosives tied together with rope. Some simply strapped mines directly onto their bodies. Again and again, American tank crews watched men sprint through bullets, explosions, and walls of fire with only one objective: reach the tank, even if it meant dying. To many Americans witnessing these attacks for the first time, the behavior seemed irrational. Why would anyone throw away their life for almost no chance of success? Why would trained soldiers attack armored vehicles with nothing but explosives held in their hands? The answer lies deep inside Japan's military culture. A culture that transformed surrender into disgrace, death into honor, and sacrifice into duty. But before understanding why these soldiers willingly accepted almost certain death, we need to understand the battlefield they were fighting on. By 1944, the Pacific War had turned decisively against Japan. The empire that had once expanded across Asia with breathtaking speed was now slowly collapsing. American factories were producing ships, aircraft, tanks, and ammunition faster than Japan could destroy them. Every month, the United States grew stronger. Japan grew weaker. Entire islands that had once served as powerful defensive positions became isolated. American naval forces controlled the seas. American aircraft dominated the skies. Japanese supply ships were sunk faster than replacements could be built. Food became scarce. Fuel became precious. Medicine almost disappeared. Yet despite these impossible conditions, Japanese commanders continued issuing the same order. Hold the island. No retreat. No surrender. Fight until the last man. This philosophy completely changed how battles were fought. Unlike many European battlefields where armies maneuvered across open terrain, the Pacific became a brutal struggle against hidden defenses. Japanese engineers transformed volcanic islands into underground fortresses. On Iwo Jima alone, they constructed more than 11 miles of tunnels. Entire hospitals operated beneath the surface. Command posts connected through hidden passageways. Machine gun nests appeared suddenly from invisible openings. Artillery guns fired from caves before disappearing behind reinforced steel doors. American soldiers often believed they had captured an area, only for Japanese troops to emerge hours later from another tunnel behind them. Traditional bombing barely worked. Naval shells weighing thousands of pounds smashed into volcanic rock without destroying the underground network. Aircraft dropped hundreds of bombs. Yet many defenders survived safely beneath layers of stone. American commanders quickly realized something terrifying. They weren't fighting an army positioned on the island. They were fighting an army hidden inside the island. Every cave became a fortress. Every bunker became a death trap. Every hillside concealed another defensive position. Progress slowed to only a few hundred yards per day, sometimes even less. Then came the greatest obstacle of all: the caves themselves. Imagine being an American Marine approaching a dark opening in the side of a mountain. Inside, you know enemy soldiers are waiting. You don't know how many. You don't know where they are positioned. You don't know whether the cave extends 50 feet or 500. The moment someone enters, machine guns open fire. Grenades roll downhill. Snipers hidden in darkness begin shooting. Every cave became a miniature battlefield. Storming them cost enormous numbers of lives. American commanders desperately searched for another solution. One weapon had existed for decades but had rarely been used on such a massive scale. The flamethrower. Earlier portable flamethrowers carried by infantry proved useful but had serious limitations. Their range was short. Their fuel supply lasted only seconds. Operators became prime targets because of the heavy tanks carried on their backs. Military engineers wondered, what if the flamethrower wasn't carried by a soldier? What if it was mounted on a tank instead? The answer changed the Pacific War forever. Engineers modified M4 Sherman tanks by replacing their main cannon or adding specialized flamethrower systems capable of carrying hundreds of gallons of fuel. Protected by thick armor, these vehicles could approach enemy bunkers far more safely than infantry. When the trigger was pulled, a stream of burning fuel erupted outward with terrifying force. Unlike Hollywood movies, the purpose wasn't merely to burn enemy soldiers. The true objective was psychological. Fire consumed oxygen. Smoke blinded defenders. Extreme heat forced troops to abandon positions that bombs had failed to destroy. Many caves were captured without American soldiers ever entering them. The weapon's reputation spread faster than the tanks themselves. Japanese defenders soon recognized the distinctive silhouette of flame tanks. Once they appeared, fear spread through underground positions almost instantly. American Marines noticed something remarkable. Enemy resistance often changed dramatically after the first burst of flame. Some defenders fled into the open. Others remained hidden. And some made a decision that stunned even veteran combat troops. Instead of escaping, they prepared to attack the tanks directly. Tank crews soon learned that destroying bunkers was only half their mission. Protecting the flamethrower vehicle from suicidal attackers became equally important. Because Japanese soldiers had reached a conclusion of their own. If the Zippo tanks could not be stopped, every underground fortress would eventually become a furnace. Every carefully prepared defense would disappear in fire. Every island would fall. So they chose the only option they believed remained. Destroy the tanks, no matter the cost. The battlefield was about to witness one of the most desperate forms of anti-tank warfare in military history. Men carrying explosives against machines built from 30 tons of steel. It sounded impossible. Yet time after time, they tried. Sometimes they failed before getting within 50 yards. Sometimes they reached the tracks. A handful even succeeded in crippling American armor. But every successful attack came with the same price. The attacker never returned. The question is, what could convince thousands of soldiers that such a death wasn't simply acceptable, but honorable? The answer wasn't born on the battlefields of World War II. It had been growing inside Japan for generations. And it transformed ordinary young men into warriors who believed dying beneath an American tank could become the greatest achievement of their lives. Chapter 2. A culture that made death more powerful than survival. Long before the first American flamethrower tank rolled onto a Pacific island. Long before the first Sherman crossed a volcanic beach. Long before World War II even began. Japan had already built an army unlike almost any other in the modern world. Its greatest weapon wasn't a rifle. It wasn't a tank. It wasn't an aircraft. It was belief. From the day many young recruits entered military training, they were taught that their lives no longer belonged to them. They belonged to the emperor. To modern Americans, that idea can be difficult to understand. The Emperor of Japan wasn't viewed simply as a political leader. Millions believed he descended from the sun goddess herself. Serving him wasn't merely patriotism. It was considered a sacred duty. Military instructors reinforced this message every single day. Recruits learned that personal survival meant very little. Honor meant everything. Failure brought shame. Capture brought disgrace. Surrender was unthinkable. Even families back home often shared these beliefs. Letters sent to soldiers rarely encouraged them to come home alive at any cost. Instead, they urged sons, brothers, and husbands to protect the honor of their family name. Many parents told their children they would rather hear of an honorable death than a shameful surrender. These weren't isolated opinions. They reflected a culture heavily influenced by an idealized interpretation of Bushido, the way of the warrior. Historically, Bushido had guided Japan's samurai for centuries. It emphasized loyalty, discipline, self-control, and courage in the face of death. But by the 1930s and 1940s, military leaders reshaped these traditional values into something even more extreme. Rather than encouraging thoughtful courage, they promoted absolute obedience. Questioning orders became dishonorable. Retreat became cowardice. Death became proof of loyalty. The Imperial Japanese Army turned these ideas into official military doctrine. Training camps were intentionally brutal. New recruits were beaten by senior soldiers. Officers often struck their own men for the smallest mistakes. Food was limited. Sleep was interrupted. Punishments were harsh. The purpose wasn't simply discipline. It was psychological conditioning. Commanders wanted soldiers who would obey instantly, even if an order guaranteed death. This harsh treatment created a chain of suffering. Soldiers abused by their superiors often abused the men below them. Over time, cruelty became normalized. Many veterans later admitted they feared disappointing their officers more than they feared the enemy. That fear became incredibly powerful in combat. Imagine standing inside a cave on Iwo Jima. Outside, American artillery shakes the ground. Flamethrower tanks are approaching. Your commander gives a simple order. Hold this position. You already know what that means. There will be no rescue. No reinforcements. No evacuation. If the bunker falls, you die. For many Japanese soldiers, refusing that order wasn't simply breaking military discipline. It meant betraying the emperor, disgracing their family, and destroying the honor they had spent their entire lives protecting. From an American perspective, survival is often considered a victory. Live to fight another day. Protect your fellow soldiers. Complete the mission. But the Imperial Japanese military measured success differently. A soldier who survived by surrendering wasn't celebrated. He was disgraced. Many believed death was preferable. American intelligence officers quickly discovered just how deeply these beliefs ran. During campaigns across the Pacific, they expected thousands of prisoners. Instead, they found almost none. On islands defended by tens of thousands of troops, only a handful surrendered, sometimes fewer than 1%. Military planners were stunned. In Europe, German and Italian soldiers frequently surrendered when surrounded. Entire divisions laid down their weapons as defeat became inevitable. In the Pacific, Japanese defenders often fought until ammunition was gone. Then they fought with grenades. When grenades ran out, they used bayonets. When rifles broke, they charged with sharpened sticks or bare hands. To American troops, these attacks seemed almost unbelievable. One Marine later recalled that they would secure an area during daylight, only to be attacked after midnight by wounded Japanese soldiers who had hidden beneath bodies or inside shell craters. Again and again, battles continued long after any realistic chance of victory had disappeared. American commanders soon realized they weren't fighting an enemy motivated primarily by survival. They were fighting an enemy motivated by obligation. That difference changed everything. Psychology became as important as firepower. Leaflets urging surrender rarely worked. Loudspeakers promising food and medical treatment often failed. Many Japanese soldiers believed American propaganda claiming they would be tortured if captured. Others feared bringing shame upon relatives back home. Some simply believed dying was the correct choice. This mindset reached its most extreme form during the final years of the war. As American forces moved closer to the Japanese home islands, military leaders began preparing the civilian population for invasion. School children practiced defending villages with bamboo spears. Women learned basic military drills. Teenagers received combat instruction. The government expected nearly everyone to resist. It reflected a terrifying reality. Japan no longer believed it could win through superior weapons. Instead, it hoped to make victory so costly that the United States might negotiate peace. Every casualty mattered. Every delay mattered. Every destroyed American tank mattered. That strategy explains why the arrival of the Zippo tanks caused such panic. The flamethrower tanks threatened the very foundation of Japan's island defenses. Months of engineering, thousands of laborers, miles of underground tunnels, massive stockpiles of ammunition. All of it could become useless if American flame reached the entrances. The tunnels protected soldiers from bombs. They protected them from artillery. But they offered little protection against fire. Smoke seeped through ventilation shafts. Heat spread through confined chambers. Oxygen disappeared. The underground fortress became a trap. Japanese officers understood this immediately. If the flamethrower tanks remained operational, the carefully planned defensive system would collapse. Stopping those tanks became a priority equal to stopping American infantry. The problem was obvious. Japan possessed very few effective anti-tank weapons on isolated Pacific islands. Heavy anti-tank guns were difficult to transport. Ammunition was limited. Fuel shortages prevented armored counterattacks. Many islands had no tanks at all. Against heavily armored Sherman flamethrowers, Japanese soldiers often faced impossible odds. Yet impossible odds didn't change their orders. If conventional weapons couldn't stop the tanks, human beings would have to. Officers began organizing specialized assault teams. Some carried magnetic mines designed to stick to steel armor. Others carried satchel charges weighing more than 20 pounds. Still others bundled multiple explosive charges together, hoping the larger blast could break tracks or penetrate thinner armor around the engine compartment. These men weren't expected to survive. Their mission wasn't escape. Their mission was impact. American tank crews quickly noticed patterns. When a flamethrower tank advanced toward a cave, nearby Japanese riflemen suddenly increased their fire. Machine guns opened up from hidden positions. Mortars exploded around the advancing armor. At first, American crews assumed this was simply defensive fire. Then they realized something else was happening. The gunfire wasn't meant to destroy the tank. It was meant to distract its crew. Hidden among the smoke and explosions, one or two soldiers would begin crawling forward. Sometimes they moved through shell holes. Sometimes beneath thick jungle vegetation. Sometimes under cover of darkness. Their destination was always the same: the tracks. Because disabling the tracks could stop even the most powerful tank. Once immobilized, the vehicle became a stationary target. And a stationary flamethrower tank was far easier to destroy. American crews soon developed a new fear. Not enemy tanks, not artillery, but individual soldiers willing to sacrifice everything for one successful attack. The battle had entered a terrifying new phase. Entire Marine units would witness Japanese soldiers running directly toward walls of machine gun fire, clutching explosives to their chest, determined to destroy a single American tank, even if it cost them their lives. And in some of the bloodiest battles of the Pacific War, they came closer to succeeding than many people realized. Chapter 3: Human Bombs Against Steel. By the summer of 1944, American tank crews had learned an unsettling truth. The greatest threat to their armored vehicles wasn't another tank. It wasn't enemy artillery. It wasn't even landmines. It was a single determined soldier, hidden in the jungle, crawling through volcanic ash, waiting patiently for the perfect moment to strike. Against a 30-ton Sherman tank, that sounded almost impossible. But on the islands of the Pacific, the battlefield erased many of the advantages armor usually enjoyed. Unlike the wide-open plains of Europe, Pacific combat took place in dense jungles, narrow ravines, shattered villages, and rocky volcanic terrain. Visibility was often measured in yards, not miles. A tank couldn't always see what was directly beside it. Bushes concealed foxholes. Craters hid enemy soldiers. Collapsed caves created blind spots. Every few feet offered another place to hide. Japanese commanders understood this terrain better than anyone. If they couldn't defeat American tanks from a distance, they would destroy them from only inches away. Special assault teams began appearing across the Pacific. Their mission was brutally simple: get close enough to place explosives directly onto the tank, no matter what happened afterward. Some carried satchel charges packed with high explosives. Others dragged anti-tank mines attached to poles. Some wrapped explosives around their bodies beneath their uniforms. A few even carried magnetic mines designed to cling to steel armor. Each weapon required one thing above all else: courage or desperation, enough to get within arm's reach of an enemy tank. 4 American crews inside a Sherman, the experience was terrifying. The tank itself felt almost invincible against rifle bullets. Machine gun fire bounced harmlessly off its armor. But everyone inside knew there were weak points: the tracks, the suspension, the engine compartment, the thinner armor around the rear. A well-placed explosive could immobilize the vehicle. Once trapped, the crew faced an even greater danger. Japanese infantry would swarm the disabled tank, throwing grenades through open hatches or attempting to force burning fuel inside. Many American tank commanders ordered every crew member to remain alert, not just for enemy guns but for movement. A shadow, a crawling figure, a helmet emerging from a shell hole. Anything unusual could mean someone was attempting a suicide attack. Machine gunners rotated constantly, scanning the ground only a few yards ahead. Infantry escorts became essential. Marines walked beside advancing tanks, protecting them from close-range attackers. This partnership saved countless lives. Whenever a Sherman advanced, riflemen spread out on both sides, watching every crater, every bush, every cave entrance. Their job wasn't simply to attack the enemy. It was to keep enemy soldiers away from the tank. Because once someone reached the armor, it might already be too late. One of the most dangerous battlefields for these attacks was Peleliu. The island looked small on a map, barely 13 square miles. American planners believed the fighting would last only a few days. Instead, it became one of the most brutal campaigns of the Pacific War. The Japanese had transformed limestone ridges into an underground fortress. Instead of defending the beaches, they waded inland. Every cave connected to another. Every ridge concealed hidden firing positions. American tanks advancing through narrow valleys suddenly found themselves under attack from every direction. Invisible soldiers fired from openings carved into solid rock. Flamethrower tanks became indispensable. Again and again they sealed cave entrances with fire. But every time a Zippo tank moved forward, Japanese assault teams followed, waiting, watching, searching for one opportunity. Veteran Marines later described seeing enemy soldiers emerge from smoke carrying satchel charges above their heads. Some were cut down immediately. Others came astonishingly close. Even a near miss forced American crews to stop advancing while engineers inspected the vehicle for damage. Every delay bought precious time for the defenders. The same pattern repeated on Saipan. Here, Japanese soldiers used nighttime attacks to increase their chances. Darkness reduced the effectiveness of American machine guns. Explosions and burning wreckage illuminated the battlefield only in brief flashes. Tank crews often heard footsteps before seeing anyone. Then, a figure would suddenly appear only yards away, running, crouching, holding explosives. American .30 caliber and .50 caliber machine guns erupted instantly. Tracer rounds sliced through the darkness. Most attackers never reached their target. But most wasn't enough, because every successful attack reminded both sides that these missions could work. One crippled tank was worth dozens of lives if it slowed an American breakthrough. By late 1944, these attacks had become so common that American crews developed routines for surviving them. Hatches remained closed whenever possible. Crew members avoided exposing themselves unnecessarily. Tanks advanced in groups rather than alone. Flamethrower vehicles rarely operated without infantry protection. Some crews even welded extra steel plates, spare track links, or sandbags onto vulnerable sections of their tanks, hoping to reduce the impact of explosive charges. Improvisation became part of survival. Then came Iwo Jima. Perhaps no Pacific battlefield better demonstrated the deadly contest between American flamethrower tanks and Japanese anti-tank assault teams. The island's black volcanic sand made movement exhausting. Sherman tanks struggled for traction. Infantry moved slowly under constant fire. Japanese General Tadamaki Kuribayashi had abandoned the old strategy of suicidal beach defenses. Instead, he built a massive underground network stretching for miles beneath the island. Every American advance became a fight for only a few hundred yards. The Zippo tanks proved indispensable. Their flames reached deep into bunker openings where artillery shells had failed. Entire cave systems became unusable after repeated flamethrower attacks. For the Japanese defenders, those tanks represented the greatest immediate threat to their carefully designed fortress. Orders spread rapidly. Destroy the flame tanks. At any cost. American crews soon noticed attackers deliberately ignoring nearby infantry. Instead of firing at Marines, they sprinted toward the tanks themselves. It was a chilling sight. Men running directly into certain death. Not to save themselves, but to stop a machine. Inside the Sherman, crew members could hear explosions striking the armor. Sometimes they felt the entire vehicle shake. Dust filled the fighting compartment. The smell of burning fuel mixed with hot steel and engine exhaust. Nobody knew whether the next explosion would penetrate the hull. Nobody knew whether another attacker was already crawling underneath the tank. Psychological pressure became enormous. Some crews reported sleeping with weapons beside them even after returning from patrols. Others admitted they began seeing movement everywhere. Every bush looked suspicious. Every shadow looked like another suicide attacker. Fear worked both ways. The Japanese feared the fire. The Americans feared the men willing to run into it. Perhaps the most extraordinary aspect of these attacks wasn't their frequency. It was the mindset required to carry them out. Imagine watching several comrades attempt the same mission. You see every one of them killed. None succeed. Your chances are almost zero. Yet when your officer gives the order, you stand up, pick up your explosives, and run anyway. That level of commitment cannot be explained by tactics alone. It came from years of military indoctrination, peer pressure, duty, and an overwhelming belief that sacrificing one's life could still influence the outcome of the battle. Sometimes, it actually did. A disabled Sherman blocked narrow jungle roads. Recovery vehicles became targets. Engineers worked under enemy fire to repair damaged tracks. Even when the tank wasn't completely destroyed, every minute it remained immobilized slowed the American advance. Time was exactly what Japan needed. Or at least, what it hoped would matter. What it hoped would matter. Because by 1945, many Japanese commanders privately understood something they would never admit publicly. They were no longer fighting to win the war. They were fighting to make America pay such a terrible price that perhaps, just perhaps, the United States might reconsider invading Japan itself. That desperate calculation would shape the final months of the Pacific War. And nowhere would it become more horrifying than on the blood-soaked island of Okinawa, where both the largest land battle in the Pacific and the deadliest anti-tank suicide attacks would unfold. Chapter 4. The Last Stand on Okinawa. By the spring of 1945, the Pacific War had reached its final and most terrifying chapter. The Japanese Empire was collapsing. Its navy had been shattered. Its air force was running out of experienced pilots. Its merchant fleet had been devastated by American submarines. Its cities were being bombed almost daily. Yet despite these crushing losses, Japan showed no sign of surrender. Instead, it prepared for one final battle. That battlefield was Okinawa. Located just 340 miles from the Japanese mainland, Okinawa was far more than another Pacific island. It was the last major defensive barrier before the home islands. If the Americans captured Okinawa, an invasion of Japan itself would become a real possibility. Japanese military leaders understood exactly what was at stake. This wasn't simply another island campaign. To them, it was the battle that could decide the fate of the nation. On April 1, 1945, more than 180,000 American soldiers and Marines landed on Okinawa in the largest amphibious operation of the Pacific War. At first, the invasion seemed almost too easy. The beaches were strangely quiet. There were few defenders, little resistance. Many American troops believed the Japanese had finally abandoned their strategy of fighting to the last man. They were wrong. General Mitsuru Ushijima had chosen a different plan. Instead of defending the shoreline, he pulled his forces into heavily fortified positions in southern Okinawa. Hidden inside hills, caves, tunnels, and reinforced bunkers, nearly 100,000 Japanese soldiers waited patiently. They intended to let the Americans come to them. When the battle finally began, it became one of the bloodiest campaigns in American military history. Rain turned the battlefield into thick mud. Tanks became trapped. Infantry advanced only a few yards at a time. Every ridge concealed machine guns. Every cave hid another defensive position. Every hill had to be captured separately. Once again, American flamethrower tanks became indispensable. Sherman Zippo tanks rolled toward fortified cave systems that had resisted artillery for days. Their mission was brutally familiar. Seal the entrances. Force defenders out. Destroy underground strongholds without sacrificing hundreds of infantrymen. The psychological effect remained overwhelming. Entire cave systems filled with smoke and unbearable heat. Some defenders fled into American gunfire. Others stayed underground until the end. But many chose a third option. Attack the tanks. Japanese anti-tank suicide teams reached their highest level of organization during Okinawa. These weren't random acts of desperation. Many were carefully planned missions. Small groups studied American movements. They identified routes used by Sherman tanks. They memorized terrain. They selected ambush points where tanks would be forced to slow down. Then, they waited. Sometimes for hours. Sometimes for days. One successful attack could stop an entire armored column. American soldiers soon realized that the battlefield never truly became safe. Even after capturing a hill. Even after clearing nearby caves. Even after destroying visible resistance. Someone might still be hiding beneath loose rocks or inside a collapsed bunker, waiting for a tank. Tank commanders changed their tactics once again. Shermans rarely advanced without infantry screening every possible hiding place. Flamethrower tanks often traveled with riflemen only a few feet away. Machine gunners scanned both sides continuously. Engineers searched roads for mines. Every member of the crew understood one terrifying reality. The greatest danger wasn't 50 yards away. It might be 5. Veterans later described hearing sudden cries of "tank." Seconds later, machine guns erupted. An explosion followed. Everyone immediately searched for smoke rising from the vehicle. Sometimes the tank continued moving. Sometimes it stopped. When it stopped, every second mattered. Rescue crews rushed forward. Japanese soldiers rushed forward too. The race had begun. Whoever reached the disabled Sherman first often determined whether the crew survived. Inside many damaged tanks, temperatures rose rapidly. Engines caught fire. Ammunition threatened to explode. Crew members fought desperately to escape through narrow hatches while bullets struck the armor outside. Some made it. Others didn't. American after-action reports revealed a sobering truth. Most suicide attackers never reached their targets. The majority were killed by escorting infantry or tank machine guns before getting close enough to use their explosives. From a purely military perspective, the tactic was extraordinarily costly. It consumed trained soldiers at a time when Japan could least afford such losses. Yet Japanese commanders continued ordering these missions. Why? Because success wasn't measured only by destroyed tanks. Every attack forced American armor to slow down. Every ambush delayed an advance. Every disabled vehicle demanded engineers, recovery crews, and additional protection. Time became the true objective. Japan hoped that enormous American casualties on Okinawa would influence political leaders in Washington. If one island cost tens of thousands of casualties, what would happen during an invasion of mainland Japan? Military planners on both sides began asking exactly that question. The answer was terrifying. American estimates for Operation Downfall, the planned invasion of Japan, predicted casualties on a scale unlike anything the United States had experienced. Japanese planners expected even greater losses. They prepared millions of civilians to resist. Teenagers drilled with bamboo spears. Women practiced carrying explosives. Old men received basic military instruction. The government urged citizens to fight however they could. The mindset that had driven soldiers toward American Zippo tanks was now spreading across the entire nation. Fortunately, that invasion never happened. In August 1945, everything changed. The United States dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Days later, the Soviet Union declared war on Japan and invaded Japanese-held territory in Manchuria. Facing overwhelming military collapse and the possibility of complete national destruction, Japan accepted surrender. For the first time in modern history, the war was over. The planned invasion, and the unimaginable bloodshed it promised, never took place. When historians look back at the Pacific War today, the image of a Japanese soldier charging an American flamethrower tank can seem impossible to understand. Why willingly run toward certain death? The answer was never simple. It wasn't because Japanese soldiers valued life less than Americans. It wasn't because they lacked fear. Veterans from both sides later admitted they were terrified during combat. The difference lay in what they believed fear demanded of them. Years of military indoctrination. Absolute loyalty to the emperor. The belief that surrender meant eternal disgrace. Pressure from fellow soldiers. Responsibility toward family. And the conviction that one sacrifice might save countless comrades. All combined into a mindset unlike almost any other modern army. For American troops, the Zippo tanks became symbols of technological superiority. Protected by steel. Powered by overwhelming industry. They represented a nation capable of adapting faster than its enemy. For Japanese defenders, those same tanks represented something far darker. The destruction of carefully built defenses. The end of months of preparation. The collapse of their final line of resistance. When they charged those tanks, they weren't simply attacking armored vehicles. They were attacking the future they feared was already arriving. Today, preserved Sherman flamethrower tanks sit quietly inside museums. Their engines are silent. Their flamethrowers no longer burn. Visitors often admire the engineering, the thick armor, the military innovation. But few realize that every scratch on their steel tells a deeper story. A story of young Americans trapped inside burning machines. A story of young Japanese soldiers convinced that dying beneath those machines was their highest duty. It was one of history's most tragic confrontations. Not because one side possessed better weapons, but because two completely different worlds collided on tiny Pacific islands. One believed survival made victory possible. The other believed sacrifice itself could become victory. And in the shadow of the Zippo tank, those opposing beliefs met in fire. The first thing the Japanese soldiers noticed wasn't the sound, it was the smell. A wave of burning fuel rolled across the battlefield, followed by an American tank that could turn an entire cave system into an inferno in seconds. The Marines called it the Zippo tank. But what happened next shocked even seasoned American veterans. Instead of running away, Japanese soldiers charged directly toward the flames. Many carried nothing more than satchel charges or explosives strapped to their bodies. They knew they would almost certainly die. So why did they do it? What could convince thousands of men to throw away their lives just to stop a single American tank? The answer is far more disturbing than most people realize. Today, we're uncovering one of the most desperate and terrifying stories of World War II. If you enjoy cinematic military documentaries backed by real history, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications, because every week we bring you incredible stories from the battlefields that changed the world. Now, let's go back to the Pacific, where fire, steel, and sacrifice collided in one of history's deadliest battles.